She thought she had successfully destroyed my livelihood with a single phone call. Hit that subscribe button right now, because watching a power-tripping HOA president try to ruin a craftsman's workshop only to face an instant, devastating retaliation is a justice story you cannot afford to miss. Brenda Vance lived at number 42, Pine Valley Lane, and she ruled our suburban neighborhood with the absolute tyranny of a tiny dictator. As the self-appointed head of the Architectural Control Committee, Brenda spent her entire day peering through white vertical blinds, hunting for minor infractions. If a blade of grass was a millimeter too tall, she slapped you with a fine. If your car tire touched the curb for 10 minutes, she called a tow truck. But her ultimate target was always my backyard woodworking shop. I'm a professional custom furniture maker, specializing in hand-carved oak dining sets and heirloom pieces. I built my workshop entirely within code on my private property, complete with industrial dust collection systems and soundproofing insulation. It was my sanctuary, my business, and my late father's legacy combined into one. Brenda hated it. She claimed the quiet hum of my band saw ruined the pristine, sterile atmosphere of her precious subdivision. For months, she tried everything. She filed fraudulent noise complaints, sent threatening certified letters, and even tried to pass a neighborhood rule banning all independent home businesses. When those failed, she decided to pull her ultimate nuclear card. She didn't just call the city building department. She called the county commercial health and safety division, fabricating a malicious lie that my shop was running an illegal, toxic chemical waste dumping operation that endangered the entire water table. 2 hours later, a fleet of county inspector vehicles rolled down our street with lights flashing, marching straight onto my driveway with clipboards, hazmat gear, and a heavy-handed stop-work order. Brenda stood across the street on her pristine lawn, watching from behind her sunglasses with a slow, venomous smirk spread across her face. She thought she had backed me into a corner. She had no idea she had just opened the door to a trap of her own making. The lead county inspector, a stern-faced man named Marcus Thorne, marched up my wooden ramp and slapped a bright yellow, immediate shutdown and cease operations notice right across my workshop door. Across the street, Brenda Vance couldn't keep her composure anymore. She strutted down her driveway in her matching pastel tennis outfit, her chin held high in the air, wearing an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Well, well, well," Brenda called out loudly, making sure every neighbor on the block could hear her performance. "I told you that your little backyard carpentry scam had reached the end of the line, didn't I? Commercial operations are strictly banned in Pine Valley. Pack up your tools, clean out your lumber, and get ready for a heavy county fine." Inspector Thorne looked over at Brenda, then back at me, frowning as he flipped through his official clipboard. "Mr. Miller, according to the emergency affidavit filed by the HOA Architectural Committee, your workshop is categorized as a commercial industrial nuisance operating without proper municipal zoning clearances." I didn't yell. I didn't smash my chisel against the wall or throw my hands up in defeat. I just crossed my arms, leaned against my workbench, and kept my expression completely calm. "Is that right, Inspector?" I asked, my voice carrying a quiet, controlled edge. "Did Brenda happen to show you the master zoning deed and the municipal covenant waivers attached to this specific parcel?" Inspector Thorne blinked, tapping his pen against his paperwork. "What covenant waivers?" "The one signed back when this entire subdivision was developed 25 years ago," I replied evenly, pulling a laminated, county-certified document from my back pocket and handing it straight to him. "Parcel 44, my property, was explicitly grandfathered in as a designated artisan live-work zone by the original county zoning board. In fact, it holds primary commercial exemption status over the entire surrounding residential association covenants." Brenda's smug smile faltered instantly. She stopped walking halfway across the street, her eyes narrowing as she sensed the sudden shift in the air. That's impossible!" Brenda shrieked, marching right up to the edge of my driveway. "The HOA rules override everything. You don't have the right to run a noisy business in our neighborhood. Inspector Thorne read through the official county seal and raised his eyebrows, looking from the document up to Brenda's pale face. Actually, ma'am, Inspector Thorne said coldly, his tone shifting from professional to severe, federal and county artisan exemptions supersede local HOA guidelines entirely. Furthermore, filing a false hazardous waste and toxic dumping claim to weaponize a municipal shutdown is a Class 1 misdemeanor. Brenda scoffed, tossing her head back. I am the president of the HOA Architectural Committee. I demand you cite him anyway. You're welcome to demand whatever you like, Mrs. Vance, Inspector Thorne replied sharply, pulling out a fresh citation book and spinning it around. Right now, I am officially issuing you a $5,000 municipal fine for filing a fraudulent emergency inspection report under false pretenses. Brenda went completely rigid, her mouth dropping open in sheer horror as the inspector handed her the pink slip. But as satisfying as it was to watch the arrogant HOA president choke on her own corruption, this was only the warm-up act. Because what Brenda didn't know was that her precious Pine Valley HOA didn't just have zoning conflicts, they had a massive financial skeleton hiding right under their clubhouse floorboards. And I held the keys to the vault. Brenda's hands shook as she snatched the pink citation slip from Inspector Thorne's fingers, her face turning a bright, mottled shade of crimson. This is a mistake. Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed a manicured finger directly at the inspector's chest. I demand to speak to your supervisor. I demand an emergency board review. You can't find me. I am the law in this neighborhood. Inspector Thorne didn't even flinch. He calmly tucked his pen back into his breast pocket, turned his back on her hysterical outburst, and walked straight over to my workshop door. With a sharp snap, he ripped the yellow Cease Operations sticker off the wood, peeled off the red tape, and replaced it with a crisp, brand-new municipal clearance seal stamped in bold blue ink. Your artisan workshop is fully cleared, Mr. Miller, Inspector Thorne said loud enough for the gathering crowd of neighborhood onlookers to hear. In fact, any further harassment from the HOA will result in an immediate injunction. Have a productive day. As the county vehicles packed up and rolled away, Brenda stood frozen in the middle of the street, clutching her $5,000 fine like a death warrant. The neighborhood onlookers, homeowners who had quietly suffered under her petty, tyrannical rule for years, began whispering among themselves, tossing her cold, unforgiving glances. Brenda spun around, her eyes blazing with absolute venom as she glared at me standing in my doorway. You think you've won, don't you? Brenda hissed, marching right up to the edge of my property line. You think a little piece of paper saves you? Enjoy your little woodworking toys while you can, because tomorrow morning at the county municipal hearing, the HOA is voting on a special multi-$1,000 property lien against your estate for aesthetic disruption. By next week, we'll foreclose on your entire workshop, sell your land to a developer, and bulldoze this dusty shack into the dirt. She laughed a high-pitched, manic laugh, turning on her heel and storming back toward her house, completely convinced she still held all the cards. She thought the HOA bylaws were an impenetrable iron fortress. She believed that no matter what happened, her little committee could bleed any resident dry through endless legal fees and forced foreclosures. She had no idea that I hadn't spent the last 6 months fighting her petty fines in court. I had been spending them executing a much larger, highly calculated maneuver. While Brenda spent her days measuring grass heights and peering through blinds, my financial portfolio management firm had quietly acquired something far more dangerous than a municipal zoning permit. We had bought the master commercial debt package of the entire Pine Valley Homeowners Association. Every single common interest asset, every shared greenbelt, the central security gates, and, most importantly, the multi-million-dollar community clubhouse and pool complex. And tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, the county commissioner's office was holding a public foreclosure auction for defaulted commercial community debt. The county commissioner's auction hall was packed to absolute capacity by 9 o'clock the following morning. Real estate speculators, local developers, and anxious suburban homeowners sat crammed onto hard wooden benches, murmuring nervously among themselves. Right in the front row, sitting with an air of untouchable arrogance, was Brenda Vance, flanked by two trembling cronies from her HOA board. She had traded her tennis outfit for a sharp, executive power suit, completely convinced she was here to witness my financial execution. When she spotted me walking down the center aisle, her lips curled into a cold, triumphant smirk. She actually patted the empty folding chair beside her, as if inviting me to watch my own funeral. The presiding county auctioneer stepped up to the elevated podium, tapped his microphone, and cleared his throat. Moving on to item 4B on today's public docket, the auctioneer announced, reading smoothly from his thick binder. Involuntary municipal lien foreclosure and execution of summary judgment against Parcel 44, commonly known as the Miller Artisan Property and Residential Estate. Brenda sat up straight, her eyes gleaming with malice. She nudged the board member next to her, whispering something that brought a pair of smug grins to their faces. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Opening bid set by the Pine Valley HOA Legal Committee at $45,000. Do I have an opening? $400,000 cash, I called out, my voice cutting sharply through the murmuring room. The gavel froze midair. The entire auction hall went dead silent. Brenda's smug grin vanished instantly, replaced by a look of utter, profound shock. She whipped her head around, staring at me as if I had spoken in an alien language. "Excuse me?" The auctioneer blinked, adjusting his reading glasses to peer down at me. "Did you say $400,000, sir?" Verified liquid capital. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a thick, bank-certified cashier's check stamped with a federal routing seal, and walked straight up to the podium, laying it flat on the wooden surface. "Paid in full," I stated clearly. "All back fines cleared, all fraudulent liens settled and dismissed under federal artisan statutes." The auctioneer inspected the routing numbers, stamped the title transfer documents with a sharp, echoing thud, and looked up at the crowd. "Parcel 44 is cleared and fully restored to the Miller estate. Liens dismissed." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Behind Brenda, several homeowners who had secretly suffered under her thumb for years had to physically cover their mouths to hide their grins of sheer disbelief. Brenda bolted upright from her chair, her face turning an angry, mottled shade of crimson. She marched right up to the edge of the podium, trembling with pure rage. "This is an outrage!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing off the high courtroom ceiling. "That property belongs to the association's future development plan. You can't just buy your way out of our rules. We'll just file another lien on Monday. We'll bleed you dry until you're homeless." She glared at me with pure venom, fully believing she still held all the power in the world. She thought the HOA bylaws were an impenetrable shield that allowed her to crush anyone who stood in her way. She didn't realize that buying back my workshop was only the opening move. I didn't yell back. I didn't even blink. I just pulled out a second, much heavier manila folder, placed it right on top of the podium, and turned to face the auctioneer. "Before we wrap up today's docket, Mr. Commissioner," I said smoothly, letting my words ring out across the silent room, "I'd like to call for the execution of item 5A on the master commercial lien schedule." The auctioneer flipped to the back of his binder, read the bold header on the new document, and his eyes went wide as dinner plates. "Wait," the auctioneer stammered, looking up at me in absolute shock. "Item 5A? You mean the master corporate debt default?" "That is correct," I nodded, sliding the papers forward. $2.8 million cash. Full acquisition of the master infrastructure debt for the entire Pine Valley Homeowners Association. Brenda stopped breathing. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a marble statue in a tailored suit. "No," Brenda whispered, her voice cracking into a panicked, breathless gasp. "No, no, no. That debt is held by Apex Capital. That's the association's master asset portfolio. I turned slowly, locking my gaze onto her wide, terrified eyes, and smiled. Apex Capital sold the entire multi-million-dollar developer debt package to my investment firm yesterday afternoon, Brenda, I said softly, loud enough for every single speculator in the room to hear. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a heavy set of master brass keys, and tossed them casually onto the table with a sharp, echoing clank. Which means, I don't just own my workshop anymore. As of 10 seconds ago, I legally own the entire Pine Valley Community Clubhouse, the swimming pool complex, the security gates, and every square inch of common ground your association stands on. The auction hall erupted into absolute, unadulterated chaos. Real estate speculators who had sat quietly moments before were now shouting over one another, pulling out their phones to call business partners, while Brenda's 2 trembling board members stared at her in sheer panic, realizing their multi-million-dollar suburban empire had just been legally dismantled in less than 30 seconds. Brenda Vance stood paralyzed, her knees visibly shaking as she clutched the back of her metal chair for support. The untouchable, arrogant dictator of Pine Valley was completely broken, staring down the barrel of a financial annihilation of her own making. You can't do this," Brenda stammered, her voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic whimper. "The clubhouse belongs to the residents. The pool is communal property. We have rights under state housing codes." Inspector Thorne, who had stayed to observe the final execution, leaned against the doorway, a slow, incredibly satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Mrs. Vance," the inspector called out, his voice cutting cleanly through the uproar. "You spent 3 years weaponizing municipal housing codes and predatory fines to evict working families and silence local artisans who didn't bow down to your little committee. You used the exact same legal framework to steal properties for pennies on the dollar." Inspector Thorne pointed a finger directly at Brenda. "Mr. Miller simply bought your corporate debt on the open market and foreclosed on your common interest assets using the exact same legal statute. Iron cuts iron, Mrs. Vance. Welcome to the free market." By Saturday morning, the entire dynamic of Pine Valley had completely flipped upside down. I didn't evict the families living in the neighborhood. They were innocent homeowners who had been terrorized by Brenda and her corrupt board just as much as I had. Instead, my first official act as the legal owner of the Pine Valley Community Clubhouse and Pool Complex was to post a massive, brightly painted banner right across the front entrance. HOA board dissolved. All predatory fines cancelled. Community property open to all residents free of charge. The local news crews showed up by noon, broadcasting the downfall of the corrupt HOA across the entire state. Within 48 hours, an emergency neighborhood recall vote was held, and Brenda Vance was unanimously stripped of her title, voted out in disgrace, and left facing an avalanche of internal investigations into how she had mismanaged the association's reserve funds. As for my woodworking shop, it wasn't under a yellow shutdown notice anymore. By Sunday afternoon, I stepped out onto my front porch, the rich smell of freshly cut cedar floating on the breeze. I took a slow sip of coffee, looked over at the newly liberated community clubhouse just down the street, and let out a deep, relaxed breath that I hadn't felt in months. "You know," I muttered to myself, resting my hand comfortably on my workbench, "some people just need a reminder that the rules apply to everyone." I looked back toward the street with a proud, glittering twinkle in my eyes. Looks like they finally learned their lesson.